Welcome to another episode of Don't Panic Geocacher. My name is Arjen and I go by Waterfan5 on the geocaching.com website. In each episode, I take you on a journey that helps you solve some mystery caches and to unravel some of their secrets. In this episode, Funny Text will dive into the world of unique text-based ciphers and codes that can be found in many mystery geocaches. I'm going to show you some examples and hopefully that will help you recognize some of these frequently used codes. And I'm also going to demonstrate some websites that can help you decode these codes and unravel the mystery of the mystery caches that you're trying to solve. So here you see some examples of what I mean by funny text. These are ciphers and codes and encryptions that are not really seriously used for any decoding purposes and never have, but they're funny in the way that they disguise the actual text or they look interesting or different. Some of them may have some historical value, but most of them have just been invented as kind of like a gadget type of cipher of code. You may have seen some of these on mystery caches. And in this case, all of these actually decipher the same text. And what I will do in this episode is go over some of these that you see here, but also others, and help you guide to some websites that can help you identify, but also decode some of them. Now, let's first take a look at just some of the ones that are listed here on this slide before we dive deeper into the websites. So all of them say don't panic geocacher. And you see that a lot of them make the text actually a lot longer, right? So you see the names behind it. So Kenny, you have Brainfork, you have Hodor, TomTom Code, Leadspeak, Goldbug, and Duckspeak that are mentioned here. And all of them have a kind of like a simple value. Kenny Code, for example, is from South Park. It's basically the mumbling of Kenny, and somebody made like a substitution cipher out of that. The second one is actually a programming language. And this actually is a program that writes out this output, but it made it in such a way that it's very unreadable for humans, but very easy to interpret for a computer. So it's easy to recognize these because they all have a very unique format. If you take, for example, like the Hodor or the Duckspeak, they keep on repeating the same words, sometimes with capitals, sometimes with lowercase, sometimes attached, etc., etc. Tomcode only uses forward slashes and backward slashes. There's actually another cipher, the pipe and slash cipher, that looks very similar. But all of them are basically a simple substitution where every letter is just replaced by a certain code, in this case with forward slashes and backward slashes, or with a simple combination of words. The Kenny cipher actually is also just a substitution cipher. And you see that a lot, that most of them are just pretty straightforward ciphers, but they are just using a kind of unusual format to obscure it a little bit more. And so once you've seen them before, and that's what I'm hopefully doing with this episode, it will help you recognize some of these, and then they become much easier to resolve. Now, Leadspeak is slightly different, and this actually writes out the letters, but just with obscure fonts. And if you take a look at, for example, the beginning, then it almost writes out like a D, and then it is like an O, which is the little thing here, and then an N, a T, and then it becomes with a P, right? This would represent a P, and so on. And that's why it says don't panic geocacher, just very obscured in letters. So every letter may actually become multiple letters, sometimes combination of letters become a single letter. There's not a single standard for Leadspeak. Different websites may all use it different, but they all have in common that they kind of try to draw out the letters and replace them with weird standard symbols, and you kind of have to read them. In easy forms, they're easy to read. In harder forms, like this one, it's pretty complicated to read, but if you recognize it, then you see like, hey, I see a T, and this might actually be English, or whatever language it is, then you can decode it. Goldbug is more of a historical one, was actually the only one on this list here that was actually used by somebody in the past, and is an actual substitution cipher where again weird characters transfer to letters. So again, easily decodable once you know how to substitute it. But again, if you have never seen it before, it may be hard to recognize. So all of these are frequently used and all over the place when you look at mystery caches. Decode is very popular. Same with some of the other ones like you see here. They may be used, and once you've seen them, it will help you decode them. So how to decode them is typically just with the use of some of the websites that we talked about. And I'm going to guide you through some of the websites. Some of them you may already be familiar with. I've certainly shown some of them already in the past. But sometimes a refresher of what a website can do and how they can help you may also help you go forward. So let's take a look at Geocache Toolbox, a very popular coding and cipher site, especially by beginner puzzle makers. So always good to take a look at and see if there's anything on there that you need or that could potentially be the solution. So it has Decode on there. It has a few other ones. So it has the 2 programming languages. So we're going to look at that one as well. It also has a keyword one that also generates strange text and funny text. So we can take a look at that as well. So let's take a look at those 3 and just start some decoding. I'll start with Decode and just put some coordinate in. So this is the Eiffel Tower location. Say encrypt. And you see immediately a limitation of Decode. It only does letters. It doesn't do numbers. So in this case, not very useful. However, if you put in the text, just basically the coordinates spelled out, then we get like a Decode description. And basically it's just a substitution cipher, right? So every n is calculated to the same letter combination as you can see in the table here below. This version of the Decode implementation actually removes the capitals, but others do not. But yeah, leave the spaces in there. They sometimes can be relevant, although it's all pairs of 3s, as you see here. So as long as you keep it pairs of 3s, you should be good. So that's the first one. Let's take a look at the second one. This is the 2 programming languages that we talked about. So let's also do a decoding there. So this one can do numbers. So we can put the numbers in here. And then we see like all the characters show up, right? So this is not a substitution cipher. This is actually a programming languages, and both of the languages are described here. They're basically just jokes. That's basically what it is, but it creates interesting ciphers, however, pretty easy to recognize once you have seen it. Same with the Ook cipher. Let's also go there and do a calculate. And basically it's supposed to be like some kind of monkey, orangutan type letters. So again, it's not a substitution cipher. It actually creates some code to write out the coordinates. So that's what you see here. And again, once you've seen it, you kind of recognize it. You never have to worry again because they're pretty easy recognizable. Going to the last one. This is kind of a substitution cipher, but a very specific one, because basically it goes from the commonly used QWERTY keyboard to the one of the Dvorak keyboards. There's other ones out there, but this translation is frequently used because it makes it somewhat unreadable if you use it. So let's now put in the coordinate again, and I see a translation. Now you see in this case, this combination will actually put a pretty readable format out there because the numbers stay the same. But if you go, for example, to a right-handed one, you see basically this translation from QWERTY to the right-handed keyboard, it becomes pretty unreadable. And the same with the left-handed, just in a slightly different way. Note that you can go from any to any, so that there's many different types of combinations that it could be out, but they all have that idea that the numbers become sometimes numbers and sometimes letters, and that's a way for you to recognize it. So those are 3 of those funny translations that still produce text, but yeah, it's not readable anymore. Another popular website is of course Cashless. It has a large variety of tools, including some tools for the ciphers that we covered in this video. So if we go to the cipher tools, we see, of course, the regular ciphers. But if you go to the code tools, you will see some of the things we just talked about, including some of the ones that we just used. They're also available here, like the keyboard ones. But for this one, let's focus on some of these. So we have the cow cipher, the moo cipher. We have the Kenny code again, but we already saw that one, so I'm not going to do that again. Let's do the neck one, which is another one. Tom Tom and slash and pipe. Now, some of these are also available on other websites, but yeah, just want to show you some more variants that you can recognize them. So the cow code is again a type of a substitution cipher, this is a programming language, similar like the moo and the ook variant. Only this one uses moo as the variant. So we can put the coordinates back in and say encrypt, and we now get basically moo variants as kind of like a program output. So again, not a substitution cipher. Generates quite a long code, as you can see here, with capitals and lowercase. I've even seen sometimes the letters being changed by other letters, because at the end it just needs to be the 3 different letters that you can then translate back to moo, but so on. Capitals in this case are very important. So, but pretty easy to recognize once you see it once. The other one is a neck, or also called duck speak. Does something similar, so let's put some information in there. Start with the numbers. We say encrypt, and now we get again some kind of translator coming out, where it basically translates these numbers to what you see right here, but now just with letter neck. So yeah, again, very easy to recognize once you've seen it once. Then there's the two other ones. They look closely alike. They're both substitution ciphers, Tom Tom code and slash and pipe. So they look somewhat similar, only one uses only left and right dashes, so forward and backward slashes, while the other one uses more like almost like books that have fallen over. But you can see each of them translate to letters. So again, pretty easy to recognize when you see it, but especially when it's a picture, it's pretty hard to decode manually. But if it's text, you can put it through some of these tools. So you see it right here, it will decode to this text. And of course, the best thing is that it can also decrypt it the other way around. So if it's left as a text, it's a pretty easy, straightforward decryption. Same TomTom, you see it right here, forward slashes, backward slashes. So we can put, of course, the other text in there and say encrypt. Now we get these slashes. And of course, the same thing, we can decrypt it, and now we decrypt the code. So again, just some funny things. Once you've seen them once, they're easy to recognize and to decode. Okay, now let's take a look at the mystery toolbox from Organizing Chaos. It does a lot of the same things other website has. So we go to the alphabets. We see, for example, the Kenny speak. In this case, let me take a look at the cold bug, which is again a pretty unique encoder. So if we put the coordinate again in there and we do encrypt, we get a combination between numbers and symbols from the ASCII table. So again, once you see it, pretty easy to recognize, but pretty hard to decode by hand, even though it's just a substitution cipher. Coldbug was actually just used for a real encryption at some point, well, by one person. But at the end, it's just a substitution cipher because it just looks confusing. This website has some of the same other things that we talked about. There's a bunch of cipher tools like the Kenny Speak that I already mentioned. But what I wanted to focus on here was two that are pretty common to be used, which is the base 64 and the base 91. So base 64 is actually used by computers to make any type of text to like a series of letters, numbers, and uppercase, lowercase to encrypt anything so that it can easily be sent. The interesting thing is that it always ends in this equal signs. So that's how you can easily recognize it, and there's no spaces in there. So it's used on the internet quite a bit to encode certain binary text. But it also means that you can use it as any encoding step. Again, pretty easy to recognize because the two equal signs at the end. And then of course, if you decrypt it again, it will go back to the coordinate, but it can encode any type of character, so also strange characters, which is nice. The same with the other one. If we go to base 91, it uses not more characters, as the name already suggests. Instead of 64, it uses 91. And if we put the characters in there, and we do encode, we now see that it also uses some symbols like slashes and dashes and dots and stuff. So it just uses more characters to encode, and we get this weird, strange, funny looking text. And of course we can decode it again and go back to our original text, exactly how it was formatted with the capitals, etc, etc. So this is just some of them that are out there. There's a bunch of tools on here, but for what we're talking about, these are some of the examples. The last one I want to show is the Decode website. A very powerful website. Used it for many of my videos. And I just want to start with the cipher identifier, because the good thing is that if you don't know or don't remember what a cipher was, this one can pretty much recognize them all, right? So if I put in the Kenny code and say analyze, it will take a look at it and it will say, oh, this looks like Kenny code. And so we can decode it. Or go to another one that I talked about, so right here, and say analyze. And it will go, oh, this is TomTom code, not to be confused with the other one we talked about, like the slash pipe and slash cipher. This one, cold bug, it will actually, in this case, oh, this is actually not cold bug. This is actually one that we're going to talk about right now, which is lead speak, and correctly analyzed it, better than I did. So then go to the last one that I want to use here as an example. And also here, we see it now comes up with the cold bug example. So it knows a lot of them and it can tell you what it is, so you don't even have to remember. So I recognize that this is pretty useful tool in general when you want to decode something and you want to see what it is. If it is one of those unique ciphers, it has no problem identifying them. Now let's take a look at two that we haven't discussed yet. The lead speak. That is the writing out of the numbers the way that they are written. So we can put it in right here. So, and say, well, we can do it simple. Let's do that first. And you see it's pretty readable, right? So it replaces some E's with 3's and some G's with 6's. So it's pretty straightforward. But now if we do it more complex, it becomes pretty hard to read. Yeah, this is an N, O. The R is in this case a dash and then the 2 and so on. So the H is a double colon and then a dash and a colon again, and that's how it writes out the H. So that's how the text is entirely written. So it is a substitution cipher, but with a variable length, making it pretty unreadable to decode. Now note, not all websites do it the same. There's many websites that do lead speak. So it may be that it partially decodes it, because there's many variations out there, but they all use the same principle, that it kind of tries to mimic how you write letters. And then the last one, based on the Game of Thrones. So here we can input the text in there, so that we have the coordinates in there. And then we say encrypt, and now we get this combination of Hodor that basically comes out of it. Now, officially, not all letters can be encoded, but what this one does, if it can't encode a letter, it puts the original one in there. So, for example, the H doesn't officially decode in Hodor, but they just put the letter H in there. But that means that if we want to decode this again, put it in there, and decode, and now it will go back to the exact same format that it has. So another one that once you see it, it's easy to recognize, or you can use the cipher identifier. So yeah, we're coming towards the end. Yeah, just a couple of useful links here. These are some of the websites that I used here or can help you decode or identify these ciphers. So yeah, take a look, make sure to bookmark them. They're just frequently used tools. Some of the websites can do the same ones. Some of the other ones can have a unique one that cannot be done by another site. And sometimes they do variations. So although things like, for example, the Kenny code is pretty standard across all websites, the lead speak could have different interpretations and different translations of different websites, and sometimes one will decode it better than the other one would. So it's always good to have options. So thank you for joining me on this episode of Don't Panic Geocacher. I hope you enjoyed it and learned maybe some new code, some new ciphers. Hopefully it will recognize it. Maybe you think like, hey, I've seen this on one of the mystery caches near you, and now you know how to solve them, right? Remember, puzzles take practice, and the more you learn, the more you know, right? So hopefully, knowing a few more codes will give you a couple more tools in your arsenal. Also, having these websites available will also help you as well. So if you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe. Subscribing will make sure you never miss any new episodes. If you do have any questions or suggestions for future episodes, feel free to let me know in the comments or feel free to contact me. You see my contact information here on the screen. With that, thank you very much and thank you for watching. And until next time, and happy puzzling, happy solving, and happy caching.